Mark, weighing 325 pounds, and Sarah, having lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about Mark's health. In short, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, Mark shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 pounds, but contemplated quitting after losing 118 pounds. After all, the journey had been arduous. When Mark expressed his desire to quit, Sarah adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story: if Mark quit, he would only receive closeness 4 times a year, prompting Sarah to seek fulfillment elsewhere due to her lovemaking needs. In the moments following Sarah's threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when Mark's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked as she witnessed sadness and hurt in his eyes, a result of her words. The marriage's foundation crumbled as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Sarah realized immediately that she had made a critical mistake. Sarah had pushed her beloved man to his limits to fulfill her desires for weight loss, then threatened infidelity as punishment. She questioned her own actions, realizing the impact on Mark. Mark expressed frustration, emphasizing the tremendous effort he put into losing over 100 pounds for Sarah's sake. He accused her of using closeness as a tool to manipulate him, expressing disappointment at her reward of continued deprivation and potential infidelity. Mark believed Sarah had jeopardized their marriage, introducing chaos into their home. He questioned her trustworthiness and speculated about her thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, he felt Sarah had ruined their marriage, leaving him uncertain about what to believe. Sarah expressed regret, insisting that she never intended to engage in infidelity despite her plea. Mark, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation and, a few minutes later, left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to contemplate the situation. In the garage, Mark declared his need for time to think, leaving Sarah in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt planted in Mark's mind, understanding the challenge of dispelling it. Reflecting on her actions, Sarah admitted her lack of consideration for Mark's feelings. She acknowledged her greed and desire for more despite Mark's previous efforts. Now she recognized the need to regain what she had lost. Mark, spending about an hour in the garage, engaged in activities to occupy his hands while contemplating the complexities of the situation. He didn't really think his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but he wasn't sure. Earlier in the day, he would have been sure, but now, after her comment, he just couldn't be sure anymore. He didn't know either if she would have cheated on him in the future. Earlier he would have never believed it, but now he wasn't sure anymore. He said out loud, "I need to find out." Mark walked back into the house. Sarah remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed with red eyes and a red nose, a result of her recent tears. Mark observed her condition, feeling a sense of regret, yet he remained resolute in carrying out his decision. He communicated to Sarah his decision to abandon the diet, informing her that he would restrict their carnal moments to the previously agreed upon 4 times a year or even none at all, leaving the choice to her discretion. Mark warned of severe consequences if she chose to engage in relations with someone else, expressing his intent to inflict physical damage on her potential lover. Mark sternly addressed Sarah, asserting that any infidelity on her part would lead to an immediate end of their relationship. He emphasized that he would not tolerate staying married to a cheater and labeled her as a fancy woman, indicating his lack of tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared his mistrust and announced his intention to closely monitor her actions, cautioning her to be exceedingly careful. Concluding his message, Mark mentioned his departure for a while, indicating his absence for lunch but assuring his presence for dinner. He offered the option of ordering food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving the atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. Mark grabbed his car keys off the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Sarah heard the garage door open and she heard Mark's car drive away. Sarah said out loud, "Oh my God, I can't believe this." How could I be so stupid? She began sobbing again and just sat there, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour or so later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then went and lay on her bed and cried some more. When Mark arrived home later that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like so many husbands who suspected his wife of cheating, Mark decided to do some detective work on his own. He thought the easiest way to start was to drive to the telephone providers and request a printout of call logs on their home phone and on his wife's cell phone. Both were in his name, so he knew he would not be having any trouble getting the reports. The landline phone company told him he could have it electronically, and they were able to upload the call logs for the last 3 years onto a CD for him. For a small fee, he gladly paid it and walked out of the office with everything he asked for. Yes, he requested 3 years because he wanted to be able to go back before he had started the diet to see if there had been any motivation for Sarah cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company and requested identical data. They hesitated at first since it was his wife's cell phone number he wanted the data for, but Mark pointed out that indeed it was a joint account with his name prominently on the records, so they had no reason to withhold any information he might request. They offered the data electronically as well, for a fee of $20. Mark thought it excessive, but probably worth the money so he could more easily access the information. He did make a note, though, that perhaps he would rethink his cell phone provider in the future. Arriving at home around 4 p.m., Mark saw Sarah laying on their bed, sound asleep. He decided to let her sleep and went back to their home office, locking the office door so he would not be interrupted. He sat down at the computer and downloaded all of the data from the 2 CDs into a folder in his documents file. He had already formulated how he would conduct his search. He was going to start with 2 years ago and compile a list of every telephone number called in that first month when he started his diet and when Sarah had restricted his closeness to 4 times a year, plus rewards for goals achieved. That would have been September of 2008. On their home phone, September had 96 calls to 19 different numbers. He found that using the format the phone company had provided for him, he could sort the data in a number of different ways. So, he created a list by numbers, showing the number, the date, the time, and the duration of the call. Once he got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create that list for every call made from their home phone in the last 2 years. He was just about ready to start the same process on Sarah's cell phone data when he heard the office door knob rattle. The door was locked so no one could come in. So, he saved everything he had been doing and stashed away all evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went and opened the door to find the most pitiful sight he could imagine. There stood Sarah in a seriously disheveled state, hair a mess, eyes and nose red from crying and sniffling every once in a while. She had her head bent down and only reluctantly looked up and into Mark's eyes. She expressed deep remorse to Mark, acknowledging the hurt and anger she caused. Sarah recognized her own selfish and cruel actions, admitting that she overstepped by interfering with his diet progress. She apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and acknowledging that the decision to continue the diet should have been solely his. Despite feeling the overwhelming influence of the situation, she pleaded with Mark to forgive her. Mark conveyed his forgiveness to Sarah, emphasizing that it was granted only based on the information available to him at the moment. He expressed his love for her and reminded her of the sacrifices he made during the 2-year struggle with his weight, including abstaining from closeness, all done for her. However, he admitted that he reached a breaking point and could no longer continue. Mark addressed the current situation, describing it as a gorilla in the room that needed to be addressed. He stressed the importance of knowing definitively whether or not she had cheated on him, as the uncertainty would drive him crazy. Mark outlined the conditions for their relationship moving forward, stating that if she had not cheated in the past and did not plan to in the future, they could be okay. However, he made it clear that he needed assurance. He held Sarah accountable for creating the mess with her hasty comment and threat, expressing his disbelief at her lack of consideration for his feelings and the damage it caused to his trust in her. Mark highlighted the need for her to deal with the consequences until he felt confident in their relationship. Sarah was hoping Mark would just forgive her and forget what she had said, but that was not to be. She thought, I suppose I deserved everything that was happening to me, but I hoped it could all go away. She nodded her head slowly in resigned agreement and turned and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She lay on her bed again, not sobbing, but with tears streaking her face. Mark opened the bedroom door and asked Sarah, "Do you want something to eat?" Sarah said, "No, Mark, I'm not hungry." Mark walked out to his car and drove off again to a place nearby called Grisham's. He and Sarah had gone there for drinks many times, and their food was excellent. He knew he could have a few beers and a greasy but delicious bacon cheeseburger. In the 2 years previous, he had not had more than 2 beers in a week's time and not 1 bacon cheeseburger. Tonight, he was going to give in and have what he wanted. He knew that he would never allow himself to get overweight like he had been before, but tonight he was going to splurge and enjoy his dinner, even though his heart was breaking. When he got home, he went back to the office and began working on the call log from Sarah's cell phone. Because he already knew the drill, it was easier to finish the cell phone list, and he was done in half the time. After reviewing the 2 lists, Mark determined that over the course of 2 years, they had 3,482 calls made in total from a total of 45 different telephone numbers. He decided to sort the calls by telephone number and had some surprising results. There were almost 300 calls to his cell phone, about 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar number of calls to Sarah's parents' number. There were close to that many to each of Sarah's sisters and about half that number to his brother John. In addition, there was a scattering of calls to various friends who Mark recognized the numbers and a few to other numbers he didn't recognize. Going down the list, though, he discovered that there were over 200 calls to a number he didn't recognize and another 50-plus calls to a second number he didn't recognize. Then he realized there were some calls, 30 or more to additional numbers, that were made over the course of 2 years. He assumed those might be hair salons, stores, church, etc. None of those statistics bothered Mark much, so he just noted them and went back to the 2 major unrecognizable numbers. Being the type of guy Mark was, he decided to refine his research a little more and sorted the calls by day and time for those 2 numbers. The surprising results gave him the chills, and almost immediately, he was burning up with suspicion and anger. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., Mark attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant with meeting rooms. They convened in conference for an hour, took a 1-hour lunch break, and concluded their business by 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m. Consistently, every week at 10 a.m. without fail, there was a call to him on his cell phone. Yes, some weeks were missed, but Mark instantly recognized those were the weeks he was on vacation. But the rule remained, every Wednesday at 10 a.m., at 11 a.m. every Wednesday, a call was made to the first of the 2 numbers Mark didn't recognize. He was burning up now. It seemed too much of a coincidence not to be suspicious. Mark knew at that moment that what he was going to discover would not bring him joy. Persevering, he looked at the second number and quickly realized that these calls were consistently placed on Fridays. On Friday afternoons once a month, Mark played golf with his brother and their best friends. Finishing the 18 holes around 5:30 p.m., they would stop in the clubhouse for a couple of drinks before heading home, usually reaching home before 6:30 p.m. On those Fridays, he would shower and take Sarah out to eat. What angered him was that Sarah always called him just before he teed off to express her love and let him know she would be waiting when he finished his round and got home. Mark now understood what was going on, but he lacked visual proof or knowledge of the person with whom she was cheating. The scary part was wondering how long it had been going on and if it started only when Sarah cut him off or if it began earlier. So, he extended his investigation another year and discovered that the same calls were made once a month for the 3 months before he was cut off. Whatever Sarah was doing, she had been doing it 3 months earlier, but not as frequently. All he had to do now was figure out who and then decide what he was going to do about it. Mark thought finding out who would be easy. He ran a reverse lookup on the first number and found it to be a cell phone number not listed. He ran the reverse lookup on the second number and discovered it was listed to a Tony Batali. Of course, Mark knew exactly who Tony Batali was. He was Mark's trainer at the gym. Sarah had initially found him for Mark. So, Sarah was calling Tony on the Fridays when Mark golfed. Mark thought. He noted the address in his call log spreadsheet and decided to go out again for a while. Upon returning to Grisham's, Mark had a couple more beers. When things quieted down after the dinner rush, he approached the rather attractive bartender Brenda, seeking help. He briefly explained the situation and requested Brenda to determine if the first number belonged to Tony. He dialed the number and instructed Brenda to ask for Tony, and if it was him, to mention that a woman had given her the number as a potential trainer. If it was Tony, she should tell him that if he had openings, she would stop by the gym one of these days. Brenda, after taking the phone, inquired if the person on the other end was Tony. She explained that she was Jennifer, a woman she didn't know, who had received Tony's name from someone at her hair salon. The suggestion was made during a conversation about getting in better shape. Jennifer provided some personal details, mentioning her age 24, height 5 feet 6 inches, and current weight around 130 pounds. Despite feeling a bit scrutinized over the phone, she acknowledged that she could improve her fitness and happiness by reaching a weight of around 115 pounds. Expressing gratitude for the compliment, Jennifer inquired about Tony's availability. Upon learning that an opening had recently become available due to a client quitting, she expressed her interest. Jennifer indicated her intention to visit Tony in a couple of days to discuss the necessary steps to achieve her fitness goals. She thanked Tony and concluded the conversation, looking forward to meeting him soon. Mark sat there in amazement at what Brenda just did. She verified that it was Tony from the gym and discovered that indeed he did smack on women who used him as a trainer. She even verified that he had an opening because of a dropout. Mark thought that dropout had to be him. Damn. Sarah already called Tony to tell him what happened and to warn him to be ultra careful. The funny thing, though, as he sat there feeling lower than dirt, was the humor in what Brenda had said. He didn't know or care how much she actually weighed. She was hot just like she was. She didn't need to lose an ounce anywhere. Mark smiled at her and told her she was too funny and that he thought she was perfect the way she was, so she better stay away from Tony. He said, "No one could have a more perfect body than you do, Brenda." Brenda responded to Mark's compliment with a beautiful smile, expressing gratitude and addressing him as a kind sir. She acknowledged Mark's attractiveness, describing him as a hunk and expressing confusion about why his wife would seek companionship elsewhere. Mark, reciprocating the smile, acknowledged Brenda's words. Mark admitted that 2 years ago he might not have been considered a hunk, but he firmly stated that it didn't justify his wife's act of cheating. He thanked Brenda for her assistance, both in gathering information about Tony and boosting his deflated ego. Mark expressed his appreciation and mentioned that he should head home. He thanked Brenda once more for her support and understanding. Mark went home, and because it was late, he just went to bed. As he crawled into bed, he looked across at Sarah and was hit with a feeling of loss and disappointment. He didn't think he had ever been this low in his life, but he was also certain that before it was all over, he would feel even worse. Sarah had awakened slightly when he crawled in and said, "I love you, Mark." Mark just grunted at that and turned away from her and tried to sleep. Of course, he couldn't get to sleep right away and just lay there thinking for quite a while. He was certain that he heard a sob or two from Sarah, but she obviously had calmed down somewhat. In the morning, Mark woke up to find Sarah spooned against him, her body pressing into his back. Sensing his arousal, she reached around and placed her hand on him, expressing remorse for her previous words and requesting closeness. Mark, aware of his vulnerability, resisted the temptation, citing the need to get going that morning and the established boundaries. Mark reminded Sarah of the cutoff he had communicated earlier, emphasizing that such attempts should not be repeated. He left the bed, showered, and headed to work. Sarah, left alone, muttered to herself about deserving the consequences of her words and the accompanying emotional pain. Upon reaching work, Mark confided in his boss about the issues at home, briefly explaining the situation and receiving support. The boss advised him to take any necessary time off to address his suspicions. Mark's boss also provided the name of a reputable electronics distributor for surveillance equipment. Expressing gratitude, Mark informed his boss that he would be taking time off from Wednesday through Friday, planning to pursue his suspicions. The boss, understanding Mark's intentions, wished him good luck with a smile. Mark went to the electronics distributor's location and found out that his boss had called ahead and instructed them to assist him with whatever he needed. Visual evidence seemed challenging for him, but he felt recording was manageable. He acquired 3 top-of-the-line bugs with battery life sufficient to transmit many hours of activity to a receiver within a couple of city blocks when the operator downloaded the data. When Mark got home, a special dinner awaited him on the table, his favorite lasagna, with garlic bread and sweet green peas. He thanked Sarah for the wonderful meal and excused himself to go and watch some television. Sarah cleaned up the kitchen and joined him in the TV room, being cautious not to push in too close. At bedtime, she headed to their bedroom, giving Mark the chance to plant one of the bugs inside their home phone, ensuring a complete record of every conversation on that phone. Both parties in the conversation would be heard. Though nervous about bugging Sarah's cell phone, he decided to proceed without worrying too much. It only took a few minutes, and he was done. Now he had a source of information from either phone. The challenging part Mark faced was planting a bug in Tony's phone. While Mark already had bugs on Sarah's phones, he considered the possibility that she might use a different phone, such as a pay phone, to communicate with Tony. To cover all bases, Mark decided to try bugging Tony's phone. Recalling that Tony worked closely with a well-built blonde woman on Wednesday mornings, Mark suspected their interactions and felt the need to gather more information. He planned to seize the opportunity when Tony was preoccupied with the blonde woman to discreetly install the bug. Mark envisioned Tony being so engrossed with the blonde woman that he wouldn't notice Mark's actions. He went to the gym and saw Tony's phone sitting on his towel about 10 feet from where Tony was with the blonde. It would be risky to get the phone, but he thought, what the hell do I have to lose? He snuck in, slipped the phone into his pocket, backed out of the gym, and went into the men's room. There, he easily inserted the bug into Tony's phone. The tricky part would be getting the phone back on the towel. When he returned to the gym, he could see that Tony was wrapping it up with the blonde. He knew he would never make it to the towel and back without being spotted. Damn, he thought, how am I going to do this? After a few seconds, he decided to try to slide the phone across the floor to the towel, hoping to get it close enough so Tony wouldn't be suspicious. It involved some risk, but he went ahead and slid the phone. Despite making some noise, Tony, engrossed in the blonde, remained oblivious. Fortunately, he slid it forcefully enough for it to reach the towel, hitting it hard and sliding underneath. It was perfect. Mark believed there was no way Tony could be suspicious now, so he swiftly left the gym. At precisely 10 a.m., his cell phone rang. It was Sarah. She said she wanted to touch base before his meeting. Of course, Mark never disclosed he was off work the rest of the week, let alone skipping the meeting. After about 10 minutes, Mark began monitoring the bugs using the receiver from his car. Tony's phone rang, and he picked up quickly. Tony greeted Sarah, asking if she wanted to meet at his house as usual. Sarah expressed caution, stating Mark was highly suspicious, and they might need to quit meeting for a while to avoid trouble. Tony grumbled, reluctant to give up their encounters. Mark groaned as he heard Sarah's response, acknowledging the risk. She admitted that the first time they had closeness, she knew she'd do anything to be with him. She initially cut Mark off to enjoy their time more with Tony. Though she loved him, she couldn't take the chance now. She suggested they might resume their weekly encounters in a few weeks, but in the meantime, Tony would have to be content with one of his other girlfriends. Sarah wasn't jealous of Tony's other relationships and proposed considering meeting on the Fridays Mark went golfing. She needed time to think about it and promised to let Tony know if it could work out. Mark had suffered enough, making him sick and angry. He was determined to get revenge. Having endured Tony's advances even before he started the diet, she had used the diet as an excuse to enhance her encounters with Tony for the past 2.5 years. Sarah had been meeting with Tony every Wednesday and on the monthly golfing Fridays, totaling over 100 encounters. Mark questioned how she could claim to love him while engaging in such behavior and speculated about the possibility of other involvements. Regardless, Tony's involvement alone was enough for Mark to decide on revenge against both of them. Over the next 2 days, he devised plans, established contacts, and ensured favorable conditions for the weekend. Monitoring phone taps, Mark discovered that Sarah had arranged a beautician appointment for Friday morning in a conversation on Thursday. In the conversation with her beautician Janine, Sarah explained her desire for a new and close hairstyle to distract Mark from suspicions of infidelity. She mentioned the intention to purchase provocative lingerie to further divert his attention. When asked about Tony, Sarah admitted she might temporarily reduce their encounters but laughed it off, suggesting it wasn't a permanent decision. Despite the laughter, Mark felt devastated by the revelations, yet his anger began to drive him, burying the hurt deep inside. Tony initiated contact on Friday, proposing an immediate rendezvous with Sarah. She expressed her intense desire, but conveyed her reluctance due to the risk involved, asking for patience until Mark's suspicions subsided. With each conversation, Mark's heartbreak deepened, struggling to comprehend any love in their relationship. He perceived Sarah's actions as purely selfish, devoid of concern or respect for him. Mark pondered where things had gone wrong but remained determined to carry out his revenge. On Saturday, after lunch, the doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find Brenda, who introduced herself as a friend of Mark's. Brenda mentioned Mark's approval for her to spend time by the pool. Sarah, taken aback, agreed to show her to the pool. However, Brenda noticed Sarah's lack of a smile, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. Shortly after, Sally and Linda arrived, both informing Sarah that Mark had invited them to use the pool. They shared their connections with Mark, Sally having worked with him for years, and Linda having served them at Grisham's. Sarah, confronted with the presence of 3 attractive women, began to feel uneasy, contemplating various possibilities. The 3 women settled on chaise lounge chairs, applying suntan lotion to themselves. It didn't take them long to agree to apply sunscreen to each other to ensure they didn't miss any spots. Once they were thoroughly coated, they lay on the loungers and began soaking in the sun. Shortly afterward, they decided an all-over tan would be better. Each woman untied the strings on their bikini tops and dropped them on the towel beside the lounger. Sarah was upset and wanted to ask them to leave, but since Mark had invited them, she had to tread lightly, knowing she was already on thin ice with him. At 3:30 p.m., Brenda approached Sarah and took a seat, revealing that she worked as a bartender at Grisham's. She disclosed that on the night Sarah issued the ultimatum, Mark had stopped by for a few drinks and shared all the details about their situation. Sarah appeared startled, and Brenda expressed her belief that Sarah had made a significant mistake. Continuing, Brenda informed Sarah that Mark was now suspicious and actively investigating their situation. She conveyed Mark's warning to Sarah, stating that if he discovered past or future infidelity, he intended to be carnal with Brenda, Sally, and Linda for each instance of cheating. Sarah, shocked, attempted to respond, but Brenda interjected, adding that Mark also planned to question Sarah, and if she lied, he would be carnal with one of them for each lie. Brenda hinted that they found Mark attractive and were open to being carnal with him. Brenda, already aware of Sarah's past infidelity, anticipated Mark's carnal involvement with her. She also anticipated that Sarah, in an attempt to conceal her actions, would likely lie, leading to a busy time for Mark satisfying the 3 women. Sally joined Brenda and took a seat, sharing that she had known Mark for several years and always found him handsome and sweet. Despite his weight gain, she believed he remained the same sweet guy she had known. Sally admitted to having a crush on him, which had only intensified since he lost the excess weight. She acknowledged the troubles between Sarah and Mark and expressed her willingness to pursue a relationship with Mark, stating that he could have her anytime he wanted. Linda also chimed in, expressing that she had been observing Sarah and Mark for a couple of years. She noticed the love Mark showed for Sarah, and she made it clear that she had her eye on them. Linda's statement suggested her interest in Mark and her observation of their relationship dynamics. Linda acknowledged Mark's kindness and consideration towards Sarah, expressing admiration for their relationship. She mentioned feeling fortunate to witness such a loving connection and admitted to fantasizing about being in Sarah's position. Linda acknowledged Mark's remarkable weight loss of 118 pounds to make Sarah happy and his transformation into a hunk. She conveyed her admiration for him and expressed a desire to have a man like him in her life. At precisely 4 p.m., as planned, Mark walked out onto the pool deck, observing the presence of Sarah and the three women. He greeted Sarah and commented on the women's improved tans. Mark playfully remarked on the women's beautiful bodies, suggesting they might give him a hard time. He encouraged Sarah to join in the playful banter and jokingly asked why she hadn't removed her top. Sarah, upset by the afternoon's events, reluctantly complied. Mark then complied. Mark then posed 2 questions to Sarah, emphasizing the need for honest answers. He inquired if, at any point during their marriage, she had cheated on him. Sarah firmly denied any infidelity. Mark pressed further, specifically mentioning Tony from the gym. Sarah maintained her denial, expressing confusion about where such an idea originated. Mark continued to question Sarah about her involvement with Tony, mentioning their regular Wednesday meetings and Friday afternoons when he played golf. Despite Mark's detailed knowledge of her affair, Sarah stuck to her denial, hoping he lacked concrete evidence. Each of the women present, Brenda, Sally, and Linda, sat with satisfied grins, anticipating the unfolding revelation. Mark proceeded to expose the evidence he had gathered, including phone logs from both the landline and Sarah's cell phone. He described the pattern of calls, pointing out the regularity of her contact with Tony. Mark even had Brenda call the number, confirming it belonged to Tony. Although Mark didn't possess pictures of Sarah and Tony together, he expressed his conviction that the weekly calls were not innocent. In shock, Sarah realized the extent of Mark's knowledge, understanding that their relationship was about to face significant challenges. As she attempted to respond, Mark intervened, stating that there was little to be said and nothing that could convince him of her innocence. Despite his deep love for her, Mark admitted that his current emotions, hurt, disgust, and anger, outweighed his love. Mark introduced the 3 women, Sally, Linda, and Brenda, explaining their connections to him. He described Sally as a longtime work associate, acknowledging her beauty and sweetness. Mark disclosed that he was aware of Sally's crush on him but never acted on it out of respect for his marriage to Sarah. Sally smiled, recognizing their genuine friendship. Linda's acquaintance with Mark began during their visits to Grisham's, where she served them. Mark revealed Linda's fantasy of being with him, emphasizing her admiration for him. He complimented Linda's physical attributes, particularly praising her chest. Mark expressed his intention to indulge in the experience with Linda. Brenda, the newest acquaintance, was introduced as a seasoned bartender who showed empathy and compassion during a conversation about Mark's distress at Grisham's. Mark highlighted Brenda's assistance in obtaining information and forming a connection with her. As Mark spoke, Sarah teetered on the edge of a breakdown, visibly emotional. Tears flowed, and her breathing became erratic. Despite her desire to convey something to Mark, she remained silent. Mark, acknowledging the interest expressed by the 3 women, revealed his anticipation of enjoying carnal encounters with them, exploring sensuality in every aspect. However, he reiterated his commitment to not be unfaithful in his marriage and expressed the need to end the marriage with Sarah to pursue these relationships. Mark conveyed his reluctance to violate his pledge and asserted that terminating the marriage was the only solution. Brenda produced divorce papers from her bag and informed Sarah, a bartender by night and a process server by day, that she was being served. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotions, broke into tears at the delivery. In an attempt to plead with Mark, she apologized profusely and expressed her love, pleading with him to reconsider. Mark responded, expressing doubt about Sarah's love, citing her actions over the past 2 years as evidence. He emphasized that the issue went beyond a couple of instances, believing it occurred over 100 times. The court hearing was set for next Friday, and after the legal separation, Mark planned to commence relationships with the three women. He suggested that indulging in pleasures with them might help him find forgiveness for Sarah's affair with Tony and understand the satisfaction it brought her. Mark expressed the hope that a lasting connection with the new relationships could provide the love and support he had believed he had with Sarah. Mark informed the three women that it was time for them to leave, assuring them that he would be in touch individually. He then went into the house to gather a few belongings, preparing for a stay at a hotel until Friday, when either he or Sarah would officially move out. Unable to form coherent thoughts, Sarah remained seated by the pool, now crying softly. Mark emerged through the patio doors, placed his suitcases down, and approached her. Sarah wasn't sure what more he had to say, but it quickly became evident. Mark reminded her of the consequences he had forewarned for her lover. As it turned out, when she supposedly canceled on Tony the previous day, he pursued a relationship with the well-endowed blonde coworker he warmed up with every Wednesday morning from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. His prelude before their rendezvous. It seems Brenda, Sally, and Linda will have a similar effect on Mark, hoping it transforms him into a love-making dynamo for them. By the way, the blonde was Gino Margarella's wife. Gino took offense to Tony's involvement with his wife, and he, along with a couple of his associates, subjected Tony to a severe beating. Tony's face is now a mess, with a few remaining teeth and some broken ribs. Gino even allowed Mark the privilege of delivering a significant blow to Tony's groin. The outcome: it's doubtful Tony will produce any more hot seed, and there is skepticism about his ability to engage in love-making activities again. Mark, of course, will deny any involvement in Tony's fate. Moreover, Friday being his golf day conveniently provides Mark with an alibi through his brother and friends. Wishing Sarah a great life, Mark informed her they would meet in court the following Friday. That day, Sarah was left alone in tears. Within the next 2 hours, she packed her bags and headed to her mother's place. The divorce process took 7 months, leaving Sarah devastated and sinking into deep depression. Contrary to what he claimed about the other ladies, Mark had no intention of following through. Instead, he found solace in 2 golden retrievers and ultimately discovered unconditional true love.